Many, if not most of the framers were repulsed by slavery. They had to make a deal with the devil, and that is slave states, if they were going to have a United States of America. I'm not the only one. Clarence Thomas himself in the past has pointed out, if there hadn't been a United States of America, there wouldn't have been a civil war to end slavery. So you literally would have had these pockets of slavery that were taking place in the United States after the ratification of the Constitution, going on and on and on and on. Who was going to stop South Carolina if they were their own country? Who was going to stop Georgia if they were their own country? Who? Nobody. I mean, at some point, there may have been some kind of an uprising and that sort of a thing, but it was the Civil War that brought it to an end. And if there had not been a United States, it wouldn't have brought it to an end. So tell me, who did more and has done more for black people, this guy or Abraham Lincoln? Obviously, Abraham Lincoln. And I'm not talking because he's white or anything, because he was president. He loved the Constitution of the United States, and he loved the Declaration, and he cited them repeatedly, especially the Declaration, as justification for fighting the war to the end and abolishing slavery. And he made the point, and I've written about this extensively in Liberty and Tyranny, one of my first books. He made the point that at that Constitutional Convention, slavery came up. They could not resolve it. And so they left it to their progeny, their children and their grandchildren, because they knew it could not continue. They knew a nation born out of the Declaration of Independence where all men were created equal, unalienable rights for all men and women, unalienable rights. They knew it couldn't last forever. Thomas Jefferson, who owned a handful of slaves, was actually anti-slavery. I know it sounds like it's hypocritical, and it was. But he couldn't figure out a way to eliminate it in his own household and to survive. That's how reliant he and others became on slaves, sad to say. Now, that said, he literally put a provision in the Declaration of Independence about slavery, and it was withdrawn because they were in the middle of what started a revolutionary war for their own survival, the survival of their own lives, the colonists, the country. And they had to come together to fight the enemy. They had to come together to fight the British, which was the most powerful military force on the face of the planet. And this was a ragtag army with a ragtag militia. And so they had to come together. They were already having problems with two of the southern states. They were already having problems with South Carolina and Georgia. Does anybody know why? Because they grew a lot of cotton. Does anybody know who they sold most of the cotton to? The British Empire. And many people in South Carolina and Georgia and some of the other states were saying, what do we give a damn what's going on in Boston, Massachusetts, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania? Those are the Northerners. I mean, you're going to pick a fight in Massachusetts and in New York and Pennsylvania with these people? That has nothing to do with us in Georgia or South Carolina and so forth and so on. You literally had, see, this is entire history. You literally had about half of South Carolina and Georgia supporting the British. It was a big problem. It was a huge problem during the Revolutionary War that people don't talk about. But it's true. But putting that aside, those issues were never going to go away. Madison, the father of the Constitution, he knew this. As a matter of fact, Madison was very young at the time of the Constitutional Convention, and he lived a long time. And he said that 50 years after his death that they could release his notes, Madison's notes of the Constitution, which have been released. But what's interesting is there was a nullification movement prior to the Civil War, and this nullification movement was starting to gain just a little bit of voice, believe it or not, in the late 1820s and early 1830s, and it was becoming more powerful. Nullification. We talked about this many months ago. What am I talking about? Where states were saying, we don't have to abide by this federal law or that federal law. We choose to nullify it. And there was a letter written to Madison. Geeks like me read this stuff. and I put it in one of my books, I forget which one, but there was a letter written to Madison saying, well, why can't states nullify laws? And this is the genius point that the father of the Constitution said. When those states ratified the Constitution, ready for this? Ready for this, Mr. Producer? The citizens of each state also became citizens of the United States. So a citizen was no longer just a citizen of South Carolina or Georgia, New York, or whatever. They were a citizen of the state and of the United States of America. So a state can't just nullify laws that deny X, Y, and Z to citizens of the United States. And Madison's concern, and he was very prescient, was if this takes hold, the republic will not stand, that it will break apart. That was his concern. That was his great concern. You know, Hamilton was more of the national government guy. This is why the left loves him. They think Hamilton is Woodrow Wilson, you know, and there's some overlay, but not a lot. Fundamental, yes. Let me clear that up. There is some fundamental overlay about the function of the central government and so forth. But obviously he wasn't a Marxist. Marx didn't live and so forth. And he wasn't a nut like Marx. Woodrow Wilson was much closer. But they were very concerned about it breaking up. Madison had a different view of liberty than Hamilton did, a different view of power than Hamilton did. And yet they came together. They were the main authors of the Federalist Papers, John Jay being one of the minor authors, and later the Supreme Court Justice, the first. But it's very important to understand this. So Madison says, no, you can't nullify laws. You'll destroy the whole construct of the Constitution. That's number one. Number two, you certainly can't leave because the country will dissolve, and your citizens are also, they're dual citizens of the state and the United States. It was a brilliant letter that he wrote back, a very extensive letter, which is very interesting because early in his life, really before the whole notion of this constitutional republic took hold in a significant way, he thought nullification was acceptable. But once the Constitution was passed and it was in place, he said, no, you can't have that.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.